Words, very important. Words are how we communicate. Words convey thoughts and emotions and concepts and descriptions. Without words, written, spoken, sign language, communication would be impossible. And even among, take dogs for instance, they communicate. They don't use words like we do, but they still have sounds that have meaning. They convey concepts and ideas and whatnot. You don't believe me? Feed a dog and let a strange dog come up to eat while your dog is eating. And your dog is going to communicate, "This is mine, leave it alone." Now, whether the strange dog adheres to that instruction doesn't mean that it didn't understand it. So, that being said, about the strange dog understanding what your dog said, even though they've never met before. You can even take dogs from different countries, different parts of the world, and they communicate. Because dogs have apparently universal concept of communication. I was going to say language, but it's not language as we know it, so communication will suffice. So, considering that, and the specific example that I gave about one dog eating and a strange dog coming up, the meanings of sounds that dogs make are pretty specific, but it's also situationally dependent. You know, for instance, as far as we can hear, if someone was to come up and threaten me on my property and my dog were present, then when my dog growls at the person who's threatening me or attempting to harm me, it probably would sound the same or very, very similar to the growl that it makes to the strange dog that's trying to eat its food. That doesn't mean it's the same. There are probably some subtle nuances that we don't pick up. Now, I've gone through all of that to convey this point. In our language, we have many, many words. We have so many words that I doubt if there's anyone other than Yahweh that knows how many words we have, and certainly none of us knows them all. Again, that would be something that only Yahweh has. So, or only Yahweh knows. So during conversation, communication between people, you desire to convey a specific idea. So you use specific words to convey that idea. Say you were talking about a car that you saw out on the road, a red Corvette, okay? Red is a very specific thing. It's a color. Like the cap here, or the spray nozzle on this can of brake cleaner. It's red, okay? Very specific. Not much room there for misunderstanding what's being said. Corvettes, however, we know that a Corvette is a model of automobile that was built by General Motors Corporation that carries the Chevrolet brand name. All right. But how many different year models of Corvette are there? Kind of a rhetorical question. I don't know how many years they've been making the Corvette. I do know they didn't make them in '83. So back to the point here. Someone coming to work, or someone gets to work and tells their coworker, I saw a beautiful '79 Corvette that was red. Okay, that is very specific, because there's only one model of car that can be a '79 Corvette that's red. Now, there's no telling how many of them there are, but that wasn't the point. The point was how specific they were in their description. And I get into that in trying to convey the understanding that people in general, especially here in the United States, are very, very lazy when it comes to language. They generalize in their speech. They don't know the meanings of words that they use. They just think the word sounds good, and because of a shift in society away from the specific towards the general in the realm of conversation, people understand them. So, hey man, you know, how about that Knicks game last night? I don't follow sports. I wouldn't know what they were talking about. Somebody else would very likely, yeah man, did you see such and such a quarterback, or you know, whatever. I don't even know what the Knicks are. Football, basketball. Anyway, you know, yeah, did you see this player? He did that thing. And because they're both on the same page, those generalities are acceptable. You can't assume that everyone is thinking the same thing that you are when you speak. So whenever you speak to whomever you speak, you should be specific. And don't get angry with people when they don't follow you and they ask you to be more specific, or they ask a pointed question to understand the context that you're speaking in. I don't follow sports. I'm not interested in sports. I don't follow NASCAR racing. I don't even know if that's classified as a sport, but I'm not interested in it. In fact, I'm not interested in most things in the world that other people are interested in. And I know it sounds silly, and it's very different, obviously. Trust me, I know, I've lived it. But because of that, a lot of times, in fact, most times, I don't understand what people are saying when they're being general. And I'm treated as if though I'm stupid because of it. Truth be told, the less intelligent person is the one who's generalizing and then gets angry when someone tries to be specific. Words are so very important. You need to understand what they mean. You need to know their definitions. You need to know the correct pronunciation. How many times have you been talking to someone and they're talking about a specific item? And yes, in my sarcastic, smart mouth way, I have said things that I shouldn't have to people who say that, such as, well, why does it have to be Pacific? Why can't it be Atlantic? And then they get confused. What are you talking about? Because they didn't mean the ocean. Their intent was to use the word specific, not Pacific. But again, because of their laziness, they didn't know the correct pronunciation, or they didn't know the word at all, and they apparently don't know that there's a Pacific Ocean. Otherwise, when they refer to their Pacific item, they should hear that word Pacific and think, well, wait a minute, is this the right word? But as a general rule, that doesn't happen. You know? Another example, and yes, I know that this is about words, but it's about more than that. It's about thinking. And I don't mean being a scientist and analyzing to the umpteenth degree. I just mean simply listening to what people are saying, listening to what you're going to say before you say it. You know, think about it, run it in your head, and whatnot. Because another example is, let's talk about sports again. I don't carry anything for sports. I mean, I'm sure they're good for some children. They're good for people. It's a way for the community to come together and things like that. And by no means am I condemning sports. I'm just not interested in sports. But to use myself in the sports example, what if I were to tell you, or, sorry, rephrase here. What if you were to come up and ask me, well, did you see that football game last night? And then I turned around and said, I could care less about football. What people mean when they say that is they don't care about it, and you know, they don't want to discuss it or something other along those lines. But did you hear what they said? I could care less. Okay, well, if you could care less, then that means that you care a little bit, if not more than a little bit. But if it's something that you have no interest in, shouldn't you have said, I couldn't care less? As in, I have absolutely zero care and concern in me about that particular thing. But they don't listen to what they're saying. They don't grasp the concept conveyed by the words that they're using. And I've noticed it more and more. And I don't mean just with the younger crowd. I've noticed this with people that are 10 and 15 and 20 years older than me. Some older even. And I just don't understand this, you know, and we wonder, you know, those of us who walk in the way of truth and life, as we were instructed by Yahweh and then later by Messiah, Yeshua, you know, it's no wonder that the people who don't walk in the way don't understand what they're reading in the Bible, because they don't, they ascribe their own meaning to the words and verses and chapters that they read, because they don't know what the words meant to start with. You know, and let's take when the Pharisees got on Yeshua, Jesus, for the disciples eating with unwashed hands. Okay, not one time are animals mentioned, not one time do they discuss a specific food. I don't believe. It may have said they were eating bread or something or other. But in a large majority, if not most, of your King James Version Bibles, you know, they go through that conversation, you know, Rabbi, rebuke your disciples, they're eating with unwashed hands. You know, they haven't washed it according to the traditions of the elders. And, you know, Yeshua comes back at them and says it's not what enters into a man's mouth that defiles him, but what comes out. Because what goes into his mouth is, it goes into his stomach and then, you know, is expelled into the chamber pot, we'll use, or toilet, you know. But what comes out of a man's mouth comes from his heart. And most of the time, after that verse where it says it's not what goes into a man's mouth that defiles him, but what comes out, in parentheses you'll see it says, thus Jesus declared all foods clean. Because they didn't listen to the context of the discourse between Yeshua and the Pharisees. The context was the Pharisees wanted the apostles to go through the procedural washing of hands according to the traditions of the elders. And Yeshua, Jesus, told them, y'all's traditions are bunk. They're pointless, you know. Doesn't matter if I sit down and eat with dirty hands. That's not what defiles me. But if I get angry and I stand here and cuss this person out because they've made me angry over something silly and stupid that, you know, in 30 minutes isn't going to matter, much less in the grand scheme of life and salvation and condemnation and spreading the gospel and so forth and so on, then the evil in my heart has proceeded out of my mouth and has defiled me in the eyes of others. But to take that just a little bit further, let's take that little bit that was in parentheses where it says, thus Jesus declared all foods clean. Okay? All foods were already clean. They always have been. Not all things are food. I mean, you wouldn't eat buzzard, would you? Would you eat poison ivy? No. How about hemlock? Would you eat that? You know, would you try to season your food with cyanide? No, because those things aren't food. They never have been. Neither is hog, shrimp, catfish, crab, lobster. Those things aren't food either. They're filthy animals. They are the cleaners of the world. You know, you wouldn't eat dog, would you? I know there are some foreign people who eat dog and treat it as a delicacy. Have you ever seen a dog eat cat poop? Have you ever turned a dog out in the yard and some animal has died in your yard in the night, you know, a squirrel, a bird, or something another like that, and what does your dog do? It either runs out and eats it, or it runs out and smells it and then rolls in it. You know, I know someone who has some dogs that recently killed a skunk in their yard. And so what happened? Obviously the skunk sprayed the dogs, one worse than the other. Well, the people that owned the dogs didn't realize that the dogs had killed the skunk in the yard. They just thought that the skunk sprayed the dogs and the skunk went on about life. So, you know, they washed the dogs and washed the dogs and washed the dogs, and they still smell like skunk. Not as strongly, but, you know, it's still unpleasant. Well, next morning they turn the dogs out, and what do the dogs do? They run back there to where the dead skunk is and roll in it. And people think that these things are food that never were. So, yes, when And you know, that little tidbit in parentheses was added by transliterators later on down the road that were trying to inject their own will into Yahweh's word. But understand that all food was already clean. You know? So, there you go. It's really, it's not hard to grasp. Certainly it's not a hard concept to wrap your mind around. You just have to first put aside your own will. Because didn't Yeshua tell us that we should die to ourselves daily? You know, cast our burdens on Him and pick up His cross and carry it, because His burden is easy. How many times do we see in Scripture? I believe it's in Deuteronomy, you know, and Yahweh Himself, God Himself, tells us to, you know, this is not so far off that you can't reach it. You know, it's not across the sea where you have to send somebody after it, or up in heaven where nobody can get to it. You know, it's right here at your feet. It's just pick it up and run with it. And He was talking about His instructions. You know, His instructions are easy to follow. But you first have to understand them. You understand them through reading, through studying, but you can't understand them even through that unless you know the words that are being used. So when you come across a word in Scripture that you've never heard before, search out the etymology of that word, the history of that word, you know, the meanings through history, what it originated from, and, you know, stuff like that. Be specific, because Yahweh is certainly specific. There's no randomness at all that comes from Him. You know, there's no confusion. There's no... I don't even know how else to explain it. It's just... It's not as hard as people want to try to make it out to be. So, anyway, that's it for now. Until next time, remember 2 Timothy 2:15. It's your responsibility to study for yourself.